Hey everyone, so I wanted to talk about why math is scientifically one of the most difficult things a student can learn. And the concepts I'm going to talk about actually go into other disciplines as well, not just math, but I really want to focus on math today. So first, I want to start off by saying thank you to the math teachers. Like seriously, my wife's a math teacher, and so I see what she goes through, right? And how difficult, lesson planning is and making sure trying to create lessons that are engaging and that are exciting and try to, connect with the students. And I know how challenging that is for her. And so thank you so much because you're teaching a subject that goes against science. And after this video, hopefully it's very clear as to why. So let's get started with it. We are born with an innate ability to do two types of math. It's called the appropriate number system. We're born being able to associate and estimate. And so, like for kids, it would be estimating sizes. Like even babies can be able to estimate which pile is bigger. And then also distance. So, when we reach for things, we know how far it is, before we grab it. I think probably one of my best or lamest examples of that, of how we're kind of innate with this ability to tell distance, is shooting a basketball, right? You throw a basketball up, it's not like you're going to miss by 100 feet, right? You kind of generally get it in a general area of where the basket is, even if you're not any good at basketball. So you can kind of figure out innately the distance. Again, even if you're not that close, you're not too far off. So we're born with that ability to do math, those two types of abilities. Everything else is a learned skill. And so all other types of math are a learned skill. Now, I've had a lot of students tell me, yeah, they take geometry, and geometry is not as difficult as algebra. I've heard that a lot. And maybe it's because geometry, includes distances and estimating, associating, etc. I think. I'm not a geometry teacher, but I've heard students will say like geometry comes a little easier to them. So there's a lot of quotes that I have in this video, and I won't read all of them. I've highlighted the main important ones that you can pause the video and look through. But the main key is our brain likes to understand why things work, why solutions work. And so it's difficult for our brain to remember something if it doesn't understand why or purpose or why things work, as opposed to how to solve the problem. How to solve the problem becomes a learned skill based on the effort that the person puts into remembering that learned skill. And so constantly having students remember how to solve a problem doesn't create meaning for the student. So the brain needs to have a purposeful meaning for what it does, not just math, but in all things. And so what happens is our brain has the ability to remember. Our brain can remember everything if it wanted to. It just doesn't want to do that because it's very tiresome. And so what it does is it starts to release information. So if our brain doesn't feel that what it's learning is relevant for survival, it's going to start slowly releasing the information. I say slowly at first, and then, as time goes on, it releases it completely. And oftentimes this happens at night when people are sleeping. The brain's kind of sifting through all the stuff it learned, and it's like, does it need that for survival? No. If not, it starts to delete the information. And it's not necessarily a math thing. It's also the same reason why English teachers notice that their students have difficulty writing thesis statements or writing intro paragraphs when you've gone over. Every English teacher from probably 6th grade on has taught intro paragraphs multiple times and thesis statements. But our brain doesn't find it purposeful. The reason being, we don't speak in intro paragraphs. We don't speak in conclusion paragraphs. We walk up to someone and just talk to them. So that's why it's foreign to our body. Our brain doesn't find purpose. So going back to math, if our brain doesn't find the relevance to survival, it will start forgetting what it's learned. And you could be the best math teacher. We have some amazing math teachers on campus, and the students really enjoy their class. And even if the math teacher explains the concept perfectly, and the student is totally paying attention and is like, I totally get that, it's a subconscious thing. the brain has to find it relevant for survival. And so it's one of those, I'll use maybe a lame analogy or lame example here. If you need something for work, your brain will start to go, okay, I need to memorize this because I need it for my job. If you're, when you're driving home, but you're not really paying attention to the directions, your body naturally takes you home. You just kind of realize, oh my gosh, I'm in my driveway already. It's because your brain has memorized the drive home. It finds it purposeful for survival. Math isn't always high on your brain's priority list for survival. So essentially the brain's principle is to forget everything except those instances that are highly important. And I'm sure what most of us have seen what's called the forgetting curve, which is where you learn something and you put the effort into memorizing it, and then after a while, the whole thing, if you don't use it, you lose it. If your brain doesn't find it purposeful or relevant for survival, you just start forgetting it quickly. And so it really literally does erase the things that it doesn't deem important for survival. It clears out unnecessary pieces of information, usually every night. So I mentioned this before, it's usually at night that our brain starts deleting the information. And after a while, the brain starts to figure out what's important and what isn't. And it bases it on how it uses the information. So, math teachers, you kind of start the year with people's brains already established where math isn't something necessarily their brain finds relevant for survival. And so my hypothesis, knowing all this, my hypothesis was like, okay, if the teenage brain is consistent in its development, right, throughout lifetimes, I've done other videos on that, like whether it was, in my previous video, one of my previous videos, like where the term teenager came from and how teenagers have been consistent throughout generations and, thousands of years. I use that to show that example. If that's true, that teenage brain development is consistent, then our math scores should be consistent, right? There shouldn't be big spikes over, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. There shouldn't be giant spikes in success because their brain will only remember a certain percentage or type of math. And so here's my findings. Here's what I found. So I found two main sources from the NAEP. And let me start by saying I completely understand data doesn't tell the whole story, so I want to make sure that's clear. And not every school in the United States, participates in this. So I totally understand that. But I think enough due to where we've got a good sample size. So the NAPE, here's the math results since 1973, and it goes through 2012. So you can see that the math results have not really moved much. They've been pretty consistent. You see, little drops, little rises, but if you look at between 1973 and 2012, there's just 2 points difference. So you can see the consistency in the math there. Let me go to another NAEP. I think this was the more recent results. They changed the way they presented this from 2005, 2019. There hasn't been a change in the math scores. And so all this money, all this professional development, I've got links to those if you want to see them. All this money, all this professional development, all this time and effort spent in the lesson planning, and we're fighting against science, right? We're fighting against the teenage brain, and it's consistent, right? There seems to be a point where teenagers are able to understand math naturally. So success, your math student success is essentially based on the student's effort that they put into memorizing these formulas, the memorizing math, because you're going to have a lot of students that are going to do well, right? We have those students, and it may not be because they're natural mathematics. They just tend to work harder at it. So my friend Don, he's a math guy, and he asked, okay, interesting. He goes, but Matt, he goes, let me ask you, if teenagers have this like certain level only that they can comprehend math, does that ever change? So like as adults, can you like with neuroscience, right? The cognitive, the frontal lobe part of the brain like tends to mature in the early 30s, and you can understand long-term analysis more, which helps in English class. But with math, is there an age where adults get it? And according to this article, imaging studies are not yet, and maybe never will be, capable of determining a specific age which adolescents are most able to learn concepts like those in algebra. We really don't know if there's an age where we go, oh, I naturally get this. So a couple things that I want to say. How do we do this? Like, what can we do to change, right? So I think students tend to have been like kind of losing their love of learning at earlier ages, maybe as more stuff has been pushed on them. We push math too early, too much, too quickly. Math students may give up because of frustration, lack of understanding, right? Sometimes the work harder doesn't always get it, right? Work harder, it doesn't always work, especially if you're fighting against your brain. If someone understands a concept, they may feel more confidence, they get more successful. That's natural. And so if it's the opposite, if a student is having difficulty in math because their brain is forgetting that information so easily, then that's going to be a challenge for them to remember. Math is sequential, right? So like they have to get this foundation before they get the next step, before they get the next step and the next one. So if their brain has already forgotten what they learned last week, it's going to be difficult for them to learn that next step. And so the one thing I could suggest, right, if you remember the video on the number one determining factor of success, it could help if we try to, if your students enjoy the teacher as a person, right? If you try to make your classroom fun, some way to connect to the students, some way to make them engaged and enjoy the lesson, it may offer a better chance for them to remember the material because they're paying attention better. Again, the challenge being that their brain is most likely going to forget the information much more easier than other places, or other topics. So what needs to change? How can this change? I'll be honest, I don't think it will dramatically change unless there's more of a functional math taught, almost like an institutional change, philosophical change, institutional philosophical change on how we teach math. There has to be a relevant purpose that the brain can get behind. I like to use this example. If you want to see math, like real math, successful math done, give your son or daughter, teenage son or daughter, $100 and to their favorite store when things are on sale. And you're going to see, like, they'll have $100. Oh, this is 30% off. Okay, that means it's $25. Okay, cool. I got $75 left. You're going to see a lot of great math done because that's purposeful. Our body understands that how much money we have and then what do we need. There was a study, and I wish I could link it here. I just thought of this right now. There was a study that showed, because we're naturally born being able to estimate things, that people would go shopping and not tally up how much they spent. And then they had like $300 and they were supposed to buy $300 worth of stuff. And so they bought all these groceries. It turns out how much they bought was close to $300 without them using a calculator. They just estimated it in their head because we have that natural ability of math. That's successful functional math. There's a lot of countries that are successful at math that are focusing more on data science. They're implementing coding into their math instruction. They're giving it a purpose. More financial literacy, financial algebra. And here's a link to an article too. I'll leave there. So bottom line, just to summarize this whole thing, math teachers, you're doing an amazing job. You're doing everything you can. You're fighting against science because realistically, what you teach, unless the student's brain finds a purposeful reason for survival, like a survival relevance to it, they're going to forget the information and they're going to forget it rather quickly. So you work as hard as you can, you differentiate your instruction, you do everything you can. But at the end of the day, or I should say, and at the end of the day, you hold your head up high because you go, look, I'm doing everything I can and I'm fighting against neuroscience. So wanted to share that information with you. Thank you guys for watching.